Did you know that some ordinary-looking half-dollar coins sitting in change jars or tucked away in old drawers can actually be worth hundreds and even thousands of dollars? These rare half-dollar coins hold secrets of American history and minting mistakes that make them treasures today. From scarce early designs to hidden mint errors, these 4 half-dollar coins are the kind collectors dream of finding, and you might just have one without even knowing it. Imagine walking into a bank in the mid-1990s and receiving change that included a heavy, brilliant half-dollar, a coin most Americans rarely saw anymore. The year stamped on it is 1995, and at first glance it looks like just another piece of pocket change. But this coin is not just metal. It is a time capsule that carries with it the memory of a fallen president, the transformation of American money, and the quiet decline of one of the nation's most powerful denominations. Behind its shining surface lies a story that stretches from the grief of 1963, when John F. Kennedy's life was cut short, to the halls of the United States Mint, where decades of change reshaped not just what coins were made of, but also what role they played in American life. The 1995 half-dollar is more than currency. It is a symbol of how history, culture, technology, and even economics converge in the palm of your hand. And once you begin to peel back its layers, you will see how a single year's issue of this coin tells us about the silver that vanished from circulation, the minting errors that fascinate collectors, the proof strikes that dazzle the eye, the decline of the half-dollar in everyday use, and the enduring image of Kennedy himself standing as a reminder of hope, promise, and tragedy. This is not just the story of a coin, it is the story of America in miniature, and by the end of this journey, you will understand why the 1995 Kennedy half-dollar is one of the most fascinating chapters in modern numismatic history. Imagine holding in your hand a half-dollar struck in 1995, a coin that at first glance may look ordinary, shining in copper nickel-clad layers, with the face of John F. Kennedy gazing forward, his profile captured in bold relief. But behind this simple piece of metal lies a remarkable story that stretches back through decades of American history, from the assassination of a president to the shifting tides of the United States Mint's policies to the dwindling role of the half-dollar in everyday commerce. This one coin opens a doorway into a much larger world of numismatics, economics, culture, and national memory. To truly understand the 1995 Kennedy half-dollar, we have to step back to the turbulent year of 1963, when the nation was shaken to its core by the sudden assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. Within hours of that tragedy, plans were already set in motion by the U.S. Mint and the Treasury to honor the fallen leader with a coin that would carry his image into every American pocket and purse. The half-dollar denomination was chosen for its prominence and visibility, and by early 1964, the Kennedy half-dollar made its debut. Struck in 90% silver, it quickly became a symbol of grief, hope, and remembrance. Millions of Americans hoarded these coins, unwilling to spend them, as they felt more like keepsakes than currency. The time we arrive at 1995, the Kennedy half-dollar had been circulating for more than 30 years, and during those decades, the coin itself underwent major transformations, reflecting changes not only in metal composition but also in the nation's monetary system. The removal of silver in 1971, replaced with the copper-nickel clad structure, marked a turning point as inflation and rising silver prices made it impossible to sustain precious metal content in everyday coinage. The half-dollar also began to fall out of regular use as vending machines, cash registers, and consumer habits shifted toward smaller denominations and later toward electronic payments. Yet the coin continued to be struck largely for collectors and for the tradition of keeping Kennedy's memory alive in American coinage. 1995 Kennedy half-dollar is part of this fascinating journey, minted in 3 different locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Each minting carried its own identity, with the circulation strikes of Philadelphia and Denver bearing the familiar P and D-Mint marks and the San Francisco Mint producing proof coins of exceptional quality for collectors in both clad and silver versions. These proofs carried a mirror-like finish achieved through careful polishing of the dies and planchets, making them highly sought after by numismatists. The mintage numbers of 1995 tell a story as well, with Philadelphia striking over 26 million pieces and Denver minting nearly 26 million more, while San Francisco produced over 2 million proof coins in clad and more than 1 million in 90% silver proof form. These numbers reveal the declining role of the half-dollar in commerce, since the millions struck for circulation often went unused and ended up stored in mint bags or sold directly to collectors. Selecting the design of the 1995 half-dollar, we see Gilroy Roberts' obverse portrait of Kennedy, still crisp and bold, his youthful face captured as an enduring symbol of leadership, sacrifice, and promise. On the reverse, Frank Gasparo's heraldic eagle spreads its wings clutching arrows and an olive branch surrounded by 50 stars. This emblem echoes the Great Seal of the United States, tying the coin directly to national identity and ideals. While both designs remained unchanged for decades, they carried layers of meaning in 1995, reflecting a generation of Americans who still remembered Kennedy's presidency and the events that cut it short. The historical context of 1995 itself is also critical when we consider this coin. It was a year in which the United States stood at the threshold of the digital age. The Cold War had ended only a few years before the economy was entering a period of remarkable growth, and yet the Kennedy half-dollar was quietly becoming a relic of an earlier time, rarely encountered in circulation, and known more to collectors and coin enthusiasts than to the average citizen. This disconnect between production and circulation highlights how coinage often continues long after its practical role has diminished, serving instead as a medium of memory and tradition for collectors. The 1995 Kennedy half-dollar offers multiple points of fascination, from mint errors such as double dies and off-center strikes to the distinction between business strikes and the carefully crafted proofs. The coin is also a gateway to broader collecting themes such as the evolution of U.S. coinage, metallurgy, minting technology, and the way cultural memory shapes what we choose to commemorate in metal. Furthermore, the 1995 silver proof versions are direct heirs to the silver heritage of the original 1964 Kennedy half, tying together 3 decades of change in American coinage policy. When we trace the journey of the half-dollar through 1995, we see not just a coin, but a mirror of America itself, reflecting its history, its grief, its technological shifts, and its evolving relationship with money. To tell the story of this single year's issue, we must weave together the strands of numismatics, economics, history, and culture, following the coin from its origins in the aftermath of a national tragedy to its quiet existence as a collector's treasure today. And as we unfold each layer, we find ourselves immersed in a story that could indeed fill hours of exploration, because every coin is not just metal, it is history, art, and memory pressed into a form small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. And the 1995 Kennedy half-dollar stands as one of the clearest examples of this truth. The story of the 1974 half-dollar is far more than just the tale of a piece of metal struck by the United States Mint. It is a chapter in American history that reflects politics, art, public memory, and the transformation of coinage in the 20th century. To understand the 1974 half-dollar, we must first go back to the origins of the Kennedy half-dollar itself, because this coin was not simply a matter of monetary design, but rather a national symbol born out of tragedy. When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, the nation was plunged into mourning, and within weeks, the United States Mint received pressure from Congress and the American public to honor Kennedy on a circulating coin. The decision was made to place his image on the half-dollar, replacing the Franklin design that had only been in use since 1948. And in 1964, the first Kennedy half-dollar was struck in 90% silver and released to the public, where it was instantly hoarded as both A keepsake and a memorial to the fallen president. By the time 1974 arrived, the Kennedy half-dollar had already been through a transformation in composition because silver was rapidly being removed from circulating coinage. The Coinage Act of 1965 had reduced the silver content of the half-dollar to 40%. And then in 1971, the mint abandoned silver entirely for general circulation, striking the Kennedy half-dollar in a copper-nickel-clad composition similar to the quarter and dime. So the 1974 half-dollar became part of this new era, where the coin was no longer a silver piece, but rather a circulating clad coin that reflected inflation, rising costs of metal, and the modernization of American coinage. Design of the 1974 half-dollar still carried the same bold portrait of John F. Kennedy, created by Gilroy Roberts, the chief engraver of the United States Mint. His profile faces left with sharp features that gave the coin an enduring sense of authority and memorial dignity. The reverse was designed by Frank Gasparro, featuring the presidential coat of arms with the heraldic eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch surrounded by a ring of 50 stars, symbolizing the unity of the nation. By 1974, this design had become iconic and familiar to millions of Americans, but it was still relatively new in the history of US coinage, only a decade old, yet firmly tied to the memory of Kennedy and the turbulent 1960s. The year 1974 itself was a dramatic year in American history, with the Watergate scandal unfolding and eventually forcing the resignation of President Richard Nixon. Coins minted during this time carry the silent backdrop of a country facing political division, economic challenges, and a loss of trust in leadership. Yet the Kennedy half-dollar served as a reminder of a different president, one remembered more favorably and connected to a hopeful vision of the future. The 1974 half-dollar was struck at 3 minting facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia coins carry no mint mark. The Denver coins bear the familiar D mark, and the San Francisco Mint produced both regular proofs and special collector strikes with the S mint mark. The mintage was very large, with tens of millions struck at both Philadelphia and Denver, and millions of proof issues from San Francisco. Yet despite these high mintages, the coin was rarely seen in daily use, because by the mid-1970s, the half-dollar had already begun its slow disappearance from circulation. Vending machines, cash registers, and banks did not favor the size of the half-dollar, and the public simply did not use it regularly. Most of the coins went into storage or into collections, and even today original rolls of 1974 half-dollars can be found largely untouched. But what makes the 1974 half-dollar fascinating for collectors is not just its widespread mintage, but the presence of notable varieties and errors among them. The most famous is the 1974 D double die obverse, where the lettering on the obverse, particularly in the word trust in the motto "In God We Trust," shows strong doubling. This variety has captured the attention of collectors because while it is not as dramatic as the famous 1955 double die cent, it is still a major double die of the modern era and can command significant premiums depending on condition. Examples in high mint state or proof-like grades are especially desirable and can turn a common coin worth 50 cents into a numismatic treasure worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Another important aspect of the 1974 series is its role in proof coinage, as the San Francisco Mint continued to perfect its techniques for mirror-like fields and frosted devices. Collectors could obtain high-quality proof coins directly from the mint, packaged in official government sets. These proofs serve as time capsules of the mint's capabilities during the mid-1970s, and their preservation in pristine condition makes them popular among serious numismatists. Historical context of the 1974 half-dollar also extends into broader monetary policy in the United States, because by this time Americans were adjusting to a currency system no longer backed by precious metals. President Nixon had taken the US off the gold standard completely in 1971, and the removal of silver from circulating coinage was part of this larger break with metal-backed money. The 1974 half-dollar therefore represents both The memory of Kennedy and the practical reality of a modern fiat currency system is both symbol and tool, both commemoration and commerce, though commerce was less frequent because of the coin's declining usage in daily transaction scholarship. Today study the 1974 half dollar not just for its varieties, but also for grading conditions, mint state preservation, and strike quality. The clad composition was prone to contact marks and bag marks, making high-grade examples, especially in Ms. 66 or Ms. 67, difficult to obtain from original rolls. Grading services like PCGs and NGC have recorded relatively few in the highest grades, which means that registry collectors who build sets of Kennedy halves often pursue these top-end 1974 issues. Aggressively, this pursuit drives prices higher for the finest examples, even though the majority of coins remain common in lower circulated grades. When we step back and view the 1974 half dollar within the entire timeline of American coinage, it occupies a unique position. It is neither as historically monumental as the first 1964 silver issue, nor as dramatically experimental as the bicentennial design of 1976, but it is firmly rooted in the heart of the 1970s. A coin struck during an era of political upheaval, economic transition, and cultural change. It carries the face of a president who symbolized youth, vigor, and optimism. Yet it circulated during a decade that saw disillusionment, stagflation, and scandal, making the coin both a reminder of lost promise and a participant in a new uncertain age. Thus, when you hold a 1974 half dollar, you are not just holding a piece of copper and nickel, you are holding a link to a president's memory, to a time when the mint was adjusting to new economic realities, to a nation wrestling with trust in leadership, and to the enduring American habit of turning tragedy into tribute through coinage. The 1974 half dollar may not be rare in sheer numbers, but it is rare in meaning because it speaks to a transitional decade in the United States and to the continuing legacy of Kennedy's image on American money. Imagine holding in your hand a piece of metal that weighs only a few grams, yet carries within it the story of America in the early 1970s, a time of social change, political upheaval, and economic uncertainty. The 1971 half dollar coin is not just a piece of currency, it is a window into the past, a physical object that reflects the decisions of the United States Mint, the legacy of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the transition away from silver coinage, and the ongoing evolution of American money. This coin, which at first glance seems ordinary, actually marks the beginning of an important chapter in US coin history, because 1971 was the very first year the United States stopped minting circulating half dollars in silver and instead moved fully into a copper-nickel clad composition. That choice did not happen in isolation. It was the result of decades of debates within Congress, rising silver prices, and a changing economy that forced America to rethink what its coins should be made of. If we go back to the 1960s, we find that the Kennedy half dollar, first introduced in 1964, had been minted with 90% silver and 10% copper. That design was created almost overnight following the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy, as a way to honor his memory, and the American public embraced the coin with overwhelming passion. Millions of Americans hoarded the coin as keepsakes, and very few made it into circulation, but the rising price of silver soon made it impractical for the government to continue issuing these coins for everyday use. So in 1965, the mint reduced the silver content to 40%. And by 1971, the final shift occurred with the introduction of a half dollar that was no longer silver. All this transition was monumental because it signaled the end of an era for collectors and the beginning of a new one for everyday coinage. The 1971 half dollar became a dividing line between silver-era coins and modern-clad coinage. When we examine the coin itself, we find that it continues the Kennedy design, with the left-facing portrait of the president on the obverse designed by Gilroy Roberts, and the presidential seal with the heraldic eagle on the reverse designed by Frank Gasparro. The design itself had already become iconic, representing both the memory of Kennedy and the prestige of the American presidency, but by 1971, this coin was no longer a symbol of wealth, it was a symbol of change. What makes the 1971 half-dollar fascinating for collectors is not only its place in history, but also the details of how it was struck and distributed. The mint facilities at Philadelphia and Denver struck circulation coins, while the San Francisco Mint produced proof coins for collectors. The Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark, the Denver coins bore the D mint mark, and the San Francisco proof coins carried the S mint mark. But here is where things get even more intriguing, because within the 1971 production run certain varieties and errors were created that today make these coins far more valuable than their face value. Some of the most famous include the 1971 D half-dollar struck on a silver planchet, a mistake that happened when leftover silver blanks from the earlier years were accidentally fed into the presses. These error coins are extremely rare and can fetch thousands of dollars at auction. Other errors include double dies, off-center strikes, and weakly struck designs, which add to the appeal for collectors and investors. Each of these rare varieties tells us something about the production challenges and the transition period at the mint during this time. And beyond the minting details, the coin also reflects the wider context of America in 1971. This was the year when the U.S. was deeply involved in the Vietnam War, when President Nixon had announced the closing of the gold window, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system, and when inflation pressures were beginning to shape American life. The half-dollar in 1971 circulated far less than other denominations, because the public had developed a habit of not using half-dollars in everyday commerce. This created a paradox. The mint continued producing millions of half-dollars, but banks and businesses reported low demand, leading to stockpiles and vaults. This circulation pattern has persisted to this day, making the half-dollar one of the least used denominations in modern America, yet it remains one of the most recognized coins in the world for collectors. When you hold a 1971 half-dollar, you are not just holding a piece of clad metal. You are holding the story of the United States shifting away from silver coinage, a government responding to economic pressures, a nation remembering a fallen president, and a mint adapting to new realities. This coin is a crossroads of history, and it is filled with secrets that make it far more than just 50 cents in value. In the course of this video, we will explore the detailed history of why the coin was created, how it was designed, what varieties and errors exist, how collectors value it today, and how this single piece of metal connects to the broader economic and political story of America in the 1970s. The 1971 half-dollar is a coin that at first looks common, but by the end of our journey, you will see it is anything but common. By the time we arrive in 1971, the Kennedy half-dollar had already gone through several transitions. The first year, 1964, was struck in 90% silver. Then from 1965 through 1970, the coins were reduced to 40% silver, a compromise between public expectation and economic necessity. But the rising global price of silver made even this compromise unsustainable. By 1971, silver had become too valuable for circulating coinage, and so the government officially ended the use of silver in the half-dollar for everyday issues, replacing it with the copper-nickel-clad composition, the same basic structure that had already been adopted for quarters and dimes, a copper core sandwiched between outer layers of nickel, giving the coin a silvery appearance without any intrinsic precious metal value. The decision was not without controversy. Many Americans felt that coins without silver were somehow cheap or less real, but from the perspective of the mint and the treasury, this was the only viable option to keep coins in circulation at their intended face value. So the 1971 half-dollar emerged as the first fully clad Kennedy half-dollar, a turning point in us Coinagawan. We look at the details of this coin. The Philadelphia Mint produced more than 155 million pieces, while the Denver Mint struck over 300 million, making it one of the highest Mintage years in the series and the San Francisco Mint focused on proof coinage for collectors struck in deep cameo brilliance. The sheer volume of coins produced means that the 1971 half dollar in its normal circulation form is very common yet. The story becomes interesting when we uncover the rare exceptions and the striking errors that escaped quality control during this massive transition period. One of the most famous and desirable rarities is the 1971 D half dollar struck on a 40% silver planchet. These rare errors occurred because leftover silver blanks from May 1970 have accidentally been fed into presses intended for the new clad coins. Only a handful of these silver planchet strikes have been authenticated, and when they appear at auction, they can sell for thousands of dollars. Other dramatic varieties include double die obverse coins, where the lettering or portrait shows noticeable doubling, creating a unique collectible item. Off-center strikes, broad strikes, and even coins struck on wrong planchets intended for other denominations. All of these errors are eagerly hunted by collectors because they connect to the uncertainty of that year, the literal mistakes made during a time of change. In the mid-1970s, America stood at a turning point in its history, and this turning point was not only felt in politics, culture, and society, but also etched forever into the very coins that passed through the hands of millions of Americans. And among these coins, the 1976 half dollar, known as the Bicentennial Kennedy half dollar, holds a place unlike any other because the single piece of metal captures the celebration of 200 years of American independence, the memory of a fallen president, and the story of a nation that was both looking back at its birth and forward to its future. To understand the power of this coin, we must travel back to 1963, when the assassination of President John F. Kennedy shocked the world. Within months, his portrait replaced Benjamin Franklin on the half dollar, symbolizing both national mourning and collective memory. But fast forward to the early 1970s, when the United States was preparing to mark the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence, the Treasury and Congress knew that something special had to be done with American coinage, so the Mint prepared a commemorative redesign for the quarter, the half dollar, and the Eisenhower dollar coins, and in doing so they created some of the most recognized coins in modern US history. The 1976 Kennedy half dollar became a centerpiece of the celebration, bearing a reverse design unlike any other ever struck before. The reverse, designed by Seth G. Huntington, depicted Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American liberty. It was a design meant to capture the very heart of the bicentennial, the place where the founding fathers had declared freedom 2 centuries earlier, and on the obverse the familiar and iconic bust of John F. Kennedy by Gilroy Roberts remained a constant, reminding the nation of leadership, sacrifice, and enduring vision. The combination of Kennedy's image on the front and Independence Hall on the back created a coin that bridged 2 defining moments: the Revolution of 1776 and the tragedy of 1963. The coin was issued with the dual date 1776 to 1976 instead of the usual single date, and this immediately made it stand out for collectors and everyday Americans alike. It symbolized the sweep of history, 200 years of struggle, triumph, innovation, and resilience, and unlike many commemorative coins that were struck in small quantities, the bicentennial half dollars were produced in the hundreds of millions by the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, and struck in both circulation strike, copper, nickel clad, and special collector issues in 40% silver, making them accessible every pocket, and yet also desirable for numismatists. When you hold a 1976 half dollar, you are holding not only money, but also a monument to history, a coin that traveled in circulation through the hands of everyday citizens during the great celebrations of America's bicentennial. Fireworks, parades, and patriotic displays swept across every city and town, and the very coins used to buy food tickets and souvenirs bore this special design. But beyond its circulation use, the coin also reflects the fascinating economics of the mint and the collector market. In the 1970s, the US Mint had learned from the lessons of the 1960s, when silver was withdrawn from coinage and coin collecting boomed. So when the bicentennial approached, the Mint prepared large quantities of special collector sets, proof and uncirculated issues to satisfy both patriotic Americans and numismatists, and today, these coins, whether found in circulated condition jingling in old drawers or in pristine condition sealed in government packaging, remain an enduring symbol of that era. But to appreciate the full history of the 1976 Kennedy $50, we must go deeper into the design, the production, the cultural meaning, and the collector value. We must understand the symbolism of Independence Hall, why Huntington's design was chosen, and how it competed with other proposed sketches. We must examine the production process in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, the challenges of striking dual-dated coins, the use of special bicentennial dies, and the decision to mint both clad and silver issues. We must look at the distribution and marketing by the mint, how proof and mint sets were sold in massive numbers as keepsakes for the bicentennial celebration. We must also trace how the public reacted to the coin, how many Americans saved them as souvenirs rather than spending them, how dealers and collectors predicted future values, and how over time the market for bicentennial $50 evolved, with some issues like the 40% silver proofs gaining stronger premiums while the clad versions remained common in circulation. And then there is the story of Kennedy's legacy itself, for this coin was more than a commemoration of the revolution, it was also a continuation of the memorial to America's 35th president, whose youthful energy and tragic death left an indelible mark on the nation. The bicentennial coinage thus became not only a patriotic tribute, but also a cultural artifact representing hope, loss, remembrance, and pride. And as we unfold this history, we must also analyze its place among other bicentennial coinage: the quarter with Jack L.R.'s colonial drummer, and the Eisenhower dollar with Dennis Williams' Liberty Bell and Moon design. Together they formed a triad of commemorative issues, each telling part of the bicentennial story. And yet, the $50 perhaps carried the most layered symbolism, because it was already tied to Kennedy's image, and now tied to Independence Hall, giving it a dual weight of memory and meaning. Collectors today often overlook the significance of the 1976 $50 because of its high mintage, but true students of numismatics understand that rarity is not the only measure of importance. Significance, history, symbolism, and cultural resonance matter as much, and in those areas the bicentennial Kennedy $50 remains unmatched. Over the course of this deep exploration, we will walk through the origins, the artistic competition, the symbolism of the designs, the role of the mint, the mintage figures, the varieties, including clad and silver, the proof sets, and the collector reception. We will examine how values have shifted over time, why certain issues carry premiums, and why this coin remains an essential part of any serious coin collection. By the end of this journey, you will see that the 1976 $50 is not just a coin, but a time capsule, a patriotic emblem, and a memorial rolled into one small disc of metal. And that is why when we hold it, we are holding not just currency, but a piece of America's story, and to understand it fully is to understand the very soul of the bicentennial era.